The cargo ship Horizon's Edge moved slowly through the dark space of the Kepler belt, its old engines humming with a sound that every crew member knew by heart. Captain Lisa Martinez sat in her chair on the bridge, watching the stars pass by while her navigation officer, Danny Park, checked their route to the next colony. They had been running supplies for 8 months now, and the work was hard, but honest. The ship carried food, medicine, and equipment to human settlements on the frontier, places where people were trying to build new lives far from Earth. Lisa's crew was small, just 6 people total, but they worked well together and trusted each other, or at least she thought they did in the engine room. Jake Collins wiped grease from his hands and looked at the power systems with a practiced eye. He was the ship's maintenance engineer, a quiet man in his mid-30s, who kept the old freighter running when most people would have given up on it. He rarely talked about his past, and the crew had learned not to ask too many questions because everyone out here had something they were running from Car and White. The cargo specialist walked past Jake's workspace and gave him a friendly wave. "Coffee in 10 minutes, she called out. And Jake nodded with a small smile. These simple moments were what he valued most now. The normal rhythm of ship life, where nothing exciting ever happened. But that piece ended when the alarm started screaming through every corridor. Danny's voice came over the ship's intercom, tight with fear. "Unknown vessel approaching fast, everyone to stations now." Lisa ran to the bridge and saw the massive warship on her screens. It was 3 times the size of her freighter, covered in weapons and armor, and flying the colors of the Vacrian Empire. Her blood went cold because everyone in human space knew about the Vacrians, a warrior species that had conquered dozens of star systems and treated other races like insects beneath their boots. "Try to run," she ordered. But Danny was already pushing the engines to maximum. The Horizon's Edge shook and groaned as it tried to speed up. But the Vacrian ship was built for war and caught them in less than 5 minutes. A tractor beam locked onto the freighter and pulled it toward the warship's docking bay. Lisa considered fighting back, but they had no weapons. This was a cargo ship, not a military vessel, and resistance would just get her crew killed faster. "Everyone stay calm," she said over the intercom, trying to sound confident even though her hands were shaking. "Do what they say, and maybe we get out of this alive." The Vacrians boarded through the main airlock, and Lisa got her first look at the aliens who had been terrorizing the frontier. They stood over 7 feet tall with thick scaled skin, powerful muscles, and faces that looked like a mix between a lizard and something from humanity's worst nightmares. They wore black armor and carried energy weapons that hummed with deadly power. The boarding team's leader, a massive Vacrian with red markings on his armor, grabbed Lisa by her jacket and lifted her off the ground like she weighed nothing. "I am Commander Throck," he said in rough but understandable English, his breath hot on her face. "Your ship is now property of the Vacrian Empire. You and your crew are prisoners." He threw her back down and barked orders to his soldiers. They moved through the Horizon's Edge with brutal efficiency, rounding up the crew and forcing them into the cargo bay. Lisa counted her people as they were pushed together. Danny, Karen, Jake, Ben Sullivan the medic, and Pete Hayes, who handled communications, all present. All terrified, the Vacrians searched the ship and laughed when they found nothing valuable. "Humans," Throck sneered, looking at the prisoners with contempt. "You spread across the stars like insects, but you have no strength. Your colonies will fall one by one, and your military is too scattered to stop us." Some of his soldiers grabbed Lisa and Danny, dragging them toward the Vacrian warship for questioning. The others, Jake, Karen, Ben, and Pete, were thrown into a holding cell, a small room with metal walls and a force field across the entrance. Ben was bleeding from his lip, where a Vacrian had hit him, and Karen was crying quietly. Pete looked angry, but knew better than to do anything stupid, and Jake just sat in the corner, calm and silent like always. "We're dead," Pete said, his voice shaking. They're going to kill us all. That's what Vakrians do. Maybe not, Ben said, though he didn't sound convinced. Maybe they'll ransom us, or... They don't do ransoms, Karen interrupted. I've heard the stories. They take what they want and leave no witnesses. Jake still hadn't said anything, just staring at his hands. The other three looked at him, and Karen frowned. Jake, you okay? He nodded slowly but didn't meet her eyes. Two Vakrian guards stood outside the cell, talking to each other in their own language and occasionally glancing at the prisoners with amusement. One of them pointed at Jake and said something that made the other laugh. Then Commander Throck returned, holding a datapad. He walked past the cell and stopped, his eyes scanning the information on the screen. His expression changed from boredom to confusion, then to something else entirely. Throck's scales went pale, and his hand trembled as he held the datapad. He turned to look directly at Jake, and for a long moment, neither of them moved. Throck whispered, his voice barely audible. It cannot be. You're supposed to be dead. The other Vakrian guards noticed their commander's reaction and rushed over. When they saw what was on the screen, they grabbed their weapons and aimed them at the cell, but specifically at Jake, who still sat quietly in the corner. What's going on? Karen demanded, looking between the Vakrians and her crewmate. Why are you? Silence! Throck roared. He barked orders in his own language, and 6 more soldiers arrived within seconds. Move that one to maximum security now. And if he moves wrong, kill everyone in this cell. The force field dropped, and the Vakrian soldiers swarmed in. They grabbed Jake roughly and put heavy metal restraints on his wrists, ankles, and neck restraints meant for war criminals and the most dangerous prisoners in the galaxy. Jake didn't resist. He let them drag him out while Corinne, Ben, and Pete watched in shock. Jake! Corinne shouted. What's happening? Jake! But he was already gone, taken deep into the Vakrian warship, while the guards left behind kept their weapons trained on the remaining prisoners' weapons that hadn't been raised before. But now, the Vakrians looked genuinely scared. Ben grabbed the bars of the cell and stared after where Jake had been taken. What did they see on that screen? He asked quietly. What did it say about him? None of them had an answer, but they all felt the same cold fear. They had been traveling with Jake Collins for 8 months, eating meals with him, working beside him, trusting him, and now they realized they didn't know him at all. Jake sat perfectly still in his maximum security cell, his breathing slow and controlled. He had been in worse situations before, much worse, but that didn't make this any easier to accept. He had spent 3 years building a new life, trying to be someone different. Someone who didn't wake up every night seeing the faces of the people he had killed. Even though they were enemy soldiers, even though he had no choice, their death still haunted him. 2,347 names that he couldn't forget no matter how hard he tried. The Vakrians watching him through the cameras didn't understand that the most dangerous thing about him wasn't his combat skills. It was the fact that he knew exactly how to use everything around him as a weapon, even in an empty cell with restraints on his wrists. But he didn't want to fight anymore. That part of his life was supposed to be over. Commander Throck entered the cell block with 6 heavily armed guards. He stopped outside Jake's cell and studied the human through the reinforced glass. I know you can hear me, Throck said. I want you to know that I fought on Arcturus Prime. I was there when you turned our advance into a massacre. Jake finally looked up, meeting the Vakrian's eyes. I was trying to save lives, he said quietly. The colonists needed time to evacuate. You could have surrendered. Throck replied, You could have negotiated. Instead, you slaughtered my comrades. Your forces gave no quarter to the mining stations they captured before Arcturus. Jake said, his voice still calm. I saw the report's entire settlements wiped out because they refused to submit, so when you came to my location, I knew negotiation wasn't an option. Throke's claws clenched into fists. You speak as if you had the moral high ground. You're nothing but a killer who got lucky. Maybe, Jake agreed. But those 14,000 people made it off that planet. Alive 700 were children, so if being a killer is what it took to save them, then I'll carry that burden. The Vakrian commander turned away, and for a moment, Jake thought he saw something in the alien's posture, not quite respect, but perhaps understanding between two soldiers who had both done terrible things in the name of duty. The containment team arrives in 6 hours, Throck said. After that, you'll be transported to our home world for trial. I wanted you to know that I argued against execution. I told High Command that you were a warrior defending your people, that you deserve an honorable imprisonment. Instead, he paused at the doorway. They rejected my request. You will be executed as an example to all humans who dare resist Vakrian expansion. Jake nodded slowly. Thank you for trying, and for what it's worth. I'm sorry about your comrades. I know that doesn't mean much, but it's true. Throck left without another word, and Jake was alone again with his thoughts in another part of the ship. Lisa Martinez was planning something desperate. The Vakrians had returned her to the cell with her crew. Thinking she was no threat, they were wrong. Listen carefully, she whispered to Karan, Ben, and Pete. I managed to memorize part of the ship's layout when they walked me through it. More importantly, I saw where they're keeping Jake. How does that help us? Pete asked. We're still locked in here. Lisa pulled something small from inside her jacket, a data chip she had stolen from Throke's desk when he wasn't looking. This has access codes for some of the ship's systems, maybe not everything, but it's a start. Ben looked at the chip in amazement. Captain, if they find out you stole that, they're going to kill us anyway, Lisa said bluntly. Throck told me as much. Once their reinforcements arrive, we're all dead. They can't risk word getting out that the Reaper is alive. The crew fell silent as the weight of her words sank in. So what's the plan? Karan finally asked. We get to the horizon's edge. Override the docking clamps and get out of here, Lisa said. But we're not leaving without Jake. Why? Pete demanded. He lied to us. He's dangerous. Maybe we're better off. He's our crew, Lisa interrupted firmly. And I'm not leaving. Anyone behind, that's final. She looked at each of them in turn. I need to know you're with me on this, because if we try to escape and fail, the Vakrians won't just kill us quickly, they'll make it painful. Ben was the first to nod. I and Jake might have a past, but he never treated any of us with anything but kindness. That counts for something. Karan nodded too. Besides, if he really is the Reaper, we need him to have any chance of getting off this ship alive. All eyes turned to Pete, who struggled with his fear. Finally, he let out a long breath. Okay, I'm in too, but if we die, I'm haunting all of you, despite everything. Lisa smiled. Fair enough. The problem was getting to Jake. His cell was in the most secure part of the ship, guarded by at least a dozen soldiers, even with the access codes. They would never make it through unless they had a distraction. The cargo bay of our ship. Ben said slowly, as if working through an idea. It's connected to their docking area. What if we caused an emergency there? The Vakrians would have to respond, pulling guards from other positions. How do we cause an emergency from inside? This cell? Karan asked. Lisa held up the data chip. If this has access to environmental controls, we might be able to vent atmosphere in specific sections, not enough to kill anyone, but enough to trigger every alarm on the ship. It was risky and probably wouldn't work, but it was better than sitting here waiting to die. That night, or what? Passed for night on the Vakrian ship, Lisa plugged the data chip into a small access panel she found near the ceiling of their cell. The Vakrians had searched them for weapons, but hadn't thought to check for data theft. The panel lit up with alien text, and Lisa cursed quietly. I can't read this. Let me try, Ben said. He had worked with alien systems before and recognized some of the symbols. After several tense minutes, he managed to access the environmental controls. Not all of them, but enough. I can trigger an atmosphere alarm in sections 7 through 12, he whispered. That includes the cargo area where our ship is docked. Do it, Lisa ordered, and set it to go off in 30 minutes. That gives us time to get ready. Ben entered the commands and pulled the chip free, just as a Vakrian guard walked past their cell. They all pretended to be asleep, barely breathing until the guard moved on. 29 minutes later, they heard the first alarm. Vakrian voices shouted in the distance, and heavy footsteps ran past their cell. The guards who had been watching them received urgent orders on their communicators and rushed away. Leaving only 2 behind, Lisa and her crew moved to the front of the cell. "Hey!" she shouted at the guards. "What's happening? Are we in danger?" One of the guards turned to tell her to be quiet, and that's when the force field flickered, disrupted by whatever chaos the environmental alarm had caused in the ship's power distribution. It was only a second, but it was enough. Ben, who had been a soldier once, moved faster than the Vakrians expected. He grabbed a metal tray from their meal and threw it at the nearest guard's head. It wasn't much of a weapon, but the surprise bought them precious seconds. The crew rushed out of the cell before the force field stabilized, and suddenly they were loose on a Vakrian warship with no weapons, no plan, and no idea if Jake was even alive. But they were free, and sometimes that was enough. Now they just had to find the most dangerous human in the galaxy and somehow convince him to help them survive. The corridor outside the cell was chaos. Vakrian soldiers ran in every direction, responding to the atmosphere alarm. And in that confusion, Lisa and her crew had a chance, maybe their only one. "This way," Ben hissed, pulling them down a side passage. He had memorized the layout that Lisa described and knew they needed to reach the maximum security wing before the Vakrians realized prisoners had escaped. They moved quickly but carefully, hiding in shadows and ducking into empty rooms whenever they heard approaching footsteps. The ship was massive, and the alarm had everyone distracted, but that advantage wouldn't last long. "There," Karen whispered, pointing to a heavily reinforced door at the end of a long hallway. "That has to be where they're keeping him." The problem was obvious. 4 guards stood outside the door, fully armed and alert despite the chaos elsewhere. There was no way to sneak past them, and the crew had no weapons. "We need a new plan," Pete said, fear clear in his voice. "We can't take on armed soldiers with our bare hands." But Lisa was looking at the ceiling, where pipes and conduits ran along the corridor. "Ben, those pipes, what do you think they carry?" Ben followed her gaze and smiled grimly. "Coolant for the ship's weapon systems. If we could rupture one, it would create a massive steam cloud. Wouldn't kill anyone, but visibility would drop to 0. "How do we rupture a pipe from down here?" Karen asked. "We don't," Lisa said. She pulled out the data chip again. "We trigger another environmental emergency. Make them think the coolant system is failing. Guards will have to evacuate or risk getting burned by superheated vapor." It was risky. The guards might just seal the door and leave Jake trapped inside, but they were out of options. Ben found another access panel and plugged in the chip. His hand shook as he worked through the alien interface, trying to trigger a controlled leak in the coolant system. One wrong command, and he might actually cause a real disaster. "Got it," he breathed. "Coolant leak in 30 seconds. We need to get into position." They moved closer to the guards, staying out of direct sight. Lisa's heart pounded so hard, she thought it might burst from her chest if this didn't work. They were all dead. The first wisps of vapor appeared from the ceiling vents. The Vakrian guards noticed immediately and raised their weapons, looking around for threats. Then the vapor became a thick cloud, and emergency alarms started blaring. The guards shouted to each other in their language. Two of them ran toward the nearest emergency station, while the other two sealed the door. To Jake's cell, exactly what Lisa had feared, but then something unexpected happened. The sealed door's lock. Panels sparked and went dark. Whatever Ben had done to the coolant system had also disrupted the power grid in this section. "Move!" Lisa shouted, and they rushed forward through the vapor cloud. The two remaining guards heard them coming and fired blind energy bolts sizzled past. Missing by inches, Ben tackled one guard low, while Pete grabbed the other's weapon arm. Karen and Lisa joined the struggle, and for several desperate seconds, they fought hand-to-hand against trained warriors twice their size. The guard Ben tackled, threw him off easily, and reached for his weapon. Then a metal restraint, still crackling with electric charge, wrapped around the Vakrian's neck from behind. Jake stood in the doorway of his cell, free from his bonds. He yanked the restraint tight, and the guard dropped unconscious. He moved to the second guard with frightening speed, disarming the alien before any of them could blink. Within seconds, both guards were on the ground, alive but not moving. Jake looked at his crew, his face unreadable. "You shouldn't have come for me." "Too bad," Lisa said, breathing hard. "You're stuck with us." Jake seemed about to argue, then nodded. "The Vakrian reinforcements arrive in 4 hours. We need to reach your ship before then." "How did you get free?" Karen asked, staring at the complex electronic locks that should have held him. "These restraints are designed to prevent physical escape," Jake said calmly. "But they have an emergency release if the wearer's life signs become critical. I know how to slow my heart rate enough to trigger the safety protocol." Of course he did. Lisa realized they were seeing the real Jake Collins now, or maybe this was the Reaper, the soldier who had held off an army alone. "Can you get us out of here?" she asked. Jake picked up one of the guard's weapons and checked its charge. "Maybe, but I need you to understand something first. If I do this, if I become that person again, people will die. Vakrian soldiers who are just following orders, who have families waiting for them." His hands tightened on the weapon. "I've spent 3 years trying to forget what it feels like to take a life, and if I start now, I don't know if I can stop." Lisa met his eyes. "Jake, they're going to execute all of us. You said it yourself. We don't have a choice." "There's always a choice," Jake said quietly. "The question is whether I can live with the consequences." Ben stepped forward. "When you fought on Arcturus Prime, you saved 700 children. My daughter was one of them." Everyone turned to stare at Ben in shock. "Her name is Sophie," Ben continued, his voice thick with emotion. "She was 6 years old, visiting her mother at the mining station when the Vakrians attacked. I was off-world with my unit, helpless to do anything, and then word came that someone had held the spaceport long enough for the evacuation ships to escape." He looked at Jake with tears in his eyes. "I never knew who it was. The reports were classified, but Sophie is 13 now. Happy and healthy because of what you did, so don't talk to me about consequences. You already made the hard choice once, and it saved my little girl's life." Jake's expression cracked, just for a moment, and Lisa saw the pain behind it all. The guilt and trauma he carried. "I'm not asking you to be a killer," Lisa said gently. "I'm asking you to be what you've always been, someone who protects people when no one else can." Jake was quiet for a long moment. Then he handed weapons to Ben and Pete. "Stay behind me. Move when I move. Stop when I stop. And no matter what you see, don't hesitate. Hesitation gets you killed." The soldier was back, and there was something both frightening and reassuring about the change in his posture, his voice, his eyes. "The docking bay is 3 levels down," Jake said. "We'll take maintenance shafts to avoid main corridors. I'll handle any guards we encounter. But I need you to watch our backs. Can you do that?" They all nodded, even though Lisa could see Pete shaking. "Good," Jake said. "One more thing. When we reach your ship, you leave immediately. Don't wait for me. I'll buy you time to escape. But I won't be coming with you." The hell you won't, Lisa snapped. We came for you, and we're leaving together. Jake smiled sadly. Captain, the moment we step out of this cell, the Reaper becomes real again, and the Vakrians will hunt me across the entire galaxy. I won't let that target follow you and your crew. Then we'll deal with it together, Lisa said firmly. Because like I told them earlier, we don't leave our crew behind, ever. For the first time since the Vakrians had captured them, Jake looked almost hopeful. All right, together then. He opened the maintenance shaft, and they descended into the darker levels of the ship. Behind them, the alarms continued to blare, and somewhere above, Commander Throck was realizing his most dangerous prisoner had escaped. The hunt was on, and the Reaper was loose on a Vakrian warship, but this time, he wasn't alone. Jake sat alone in a cell deep inside the Vakrian warship, a room designed to hold the most dangerous criminals in the galaxy. The walls were reinforced metal 3 feet thick, and he wore restraints that would deliver a lethal shock if he moved too suddenly. 3 cameras watched him from different angles, and he could sense at least a dozen guards outside the door. He closed his eyes and tried not to think about what was coming. For 3 years, he had lived a quiet life, fixing engines and drinking bad coffee, and pretending he was someone else, someone normal. Someone who could forget, but the past never stays buried forever. Meanwhile, Captain Lisa Martinez sat across from Commander Throck in an interrogation room aboard the Vakrian ship. The alien warrior looked at her with a mix of curiosity and something she couldn't quite identify. Was it fear? Respect? She couldn't tell. Your engineer, Throck said slowly, choosing his words carefully. How long has he been with your crew? 8 months, Lisa answered, confused. Why? What's this about? Throck touched his datapad and turned the screen toward her. Look at this, and tell me what you know about this man. Lisa leaned forward and saw Jake's face on the screen, but the information below it made no sense. It showed military records, classified files, and a name she had never heard before. Operation Arcturus Defense. I don't understand, she said. Jake's just a maintenance worker. He fixes things he's not. He's a war criminal. Throck interrupted, his voice hard. 3 years ago, the Vakrian Empire sent our 5th Fleet to claim the mining colony on Arcturus Prime. It was a small settlement. Barely 3,000 humans, and we expected them to surrender immediately. He stood up and began pacing, his claws clicking on the metal floor. But there was one soldier there, on leave from his unit, when our forces landed. He stayed behind while the colonists evacuated. Lisa felt her stomach twist. She had heard about Arcturus Prime. Everyone had. It was one of the few times humans had successfully defended against a Vakrian attack. Though the official reports were heavily classified, that one soldier held the main spaceport for 72 hours. Throck continued. He destroyed our landing craft, collapsed our forward positions, and killed. He paused, and his voice became quieter. He killed 2,347 of our warriors. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. That's impossible, Lisa whispered. One person can't. We thought so too, Throck said. But your people recorded everything. He used mining explosives to create traps, hacked our communication systems to track our movements, and fought with a level of skill that should not exist. We sent elite units to stop him, and they never returned. He pulled up video footage on his datapad, and Lisa's hands went cold as she watched. The footage was grainy and dark, shot from a Vakrian soldier's helmet camera. It showed a figure moving through smoke and fire, impossibly fast and precise. The camera showed weapons fire, an explosion, and then nothing but static. The colonists called him by his military designation, Throck said. The Reaper, because that's what he was. Death itself walking among us. Lisa shook her head, trying to process what she was hearing. You're wrong. Jake is quiet and gentle. He fixed a music box for one of my crew members. He wouldn't hurt anyone. Perhaps he has changed, Throck admitted. Or perhaps he has been very good at hiding who he really is, but the data does not lie. Your Jake Collins received the Solar Cross from human military command for his actions on Arcturus Prime. He saved 14,000 colonists, including 700 children. He turned off the datapad and looked at Lisa with cold eyes. He is also wanted by the Vacrian Empire for crimes against our people. I have already sent word to High Command. They are sending a special containment team with enough firepower to destroy a moon if necessary. Lisa felt sick. She thought about Jake sitting alone in his quarters, reading old books and listening to music. She thought about how he always volunteered to take the difficult repair jobs so others wouldn't have to. And now she was supposed to believe he was some kind of monster? What will happen to him? She asked quietly. He will be transported to our home world for trial and execution, Throck said. The Vacrian people demand justice for what he did. He was protecting innocent people. Lisa shot back, anger rising in her voice. Your forces attacked first. He just defended them. From our perspective, he slaughtered warriors who were simply following orders, Throck replied. War is never simple, Captain, but the reality is that your crewman has more blood on his hands than most soldiers accumulate in a lifetime. But back in the prisoner cell, Karen, Ben, and Pete were trying to understand what had happened. The Vacrian guards had been whispering to each other in their language, and while the prisoners couldn't understand most of it, they caught one word repeated over and over. Reaper, what's a Reaper? Pete asked. Why do they keep saying that? Ben was the oldest of the group and had served in human military forces years ago. His face had gone pale when he heard the word. It's a myth, he said slowly. Something the veterans talk about when they've had too much to drink. Supposedly, there was a soldier on Arcturus Prime who single-handedly fought off an entire Vacrian fleet. That's impossible, Curran said. That's what I always thought, Ben replied. But the stories say he used the terrain, the equipment, everything available as a weapon. The Vacrians started calling him the Reaper because he cut through their forces like wheat. He stopped and looked toward where Jake had been taken. They say he disappeared after the Battle Human Command gave him a medal, and then he vanished. Some people think he died. Others think he went into hiding. The three of them sat in silence, thinking about the quiet man they had worked beside for months. Could it really be true? Could Jake, who made terrible jokes and always burned the coffee, be the same person from those stories? Lisa returned to the cell an hour later, her face troubled. The guards let her in briefly to check on her crew. Captain, Karen said immediately. What's going on? Why did they take Jake? Lisa looked at each of them, trying to find the right words. The Vacrians think Jake is someone from their past, a soldier who fought them 3 years ago. Is it true? Ben asked. Is he the Reaper? Lisa hesitated, then nodded. According to their records, yes, and according to our own military files too. Jake Collins is a decorated war hero who the government quietly retired with a new identity. So he's been lying to us this whole time. Pete said bitterly, maybe, Lisa replied. Or maybe he was just trying to leave that life behind, but right now, that doesn't matter. What matters is that the Vacrians are calling in reinforcements. And when they arrive, she didn't finish the sentence, that they all understood. Commander Throck had no intention of letting witnesses live. Not when they knew the Reaper was still alive. We need to get out of here, Karen said. All of us, including Jake. How? Pete asked. We're locked in a cell on an alien warship with no weapons and no way to contact anyone. Lisa looked toward the direction where Jake had been taken, and something in her eyes hardened. I don't know yet, but Jake saved 14,000 people once before. Maybe it's time we figured out how to save him. None of them knew if it was possible, but they also knew they had to try, because whether Jake had been lying about his past or not, he was still their crewmate and in space. You never left your crew behind. The maintenance shafts were cramped and dark, barely large enough for a human to crawl through. Jake led the way with the confidence of someone who had navigated worse terrain under enemy fire, and the crew struggled to keep up. "How do you know where you're going?" Pete whispered. "All military ships have similar layouts," Jake replied softly. "Vakrians are efficient. They don't waste space on creative design. Once you understand their logic, navigation becomes predictable." They emerged on a lower level near the engineering section. Jake held up his hand for silence and listened. Footsteps approached, heavy and quick. At least 6 soldiers searching for escaped prisoners. Jake turned to the crew. "Stay here," he mouthed, then disappeared into the shadows. Before Lisa could argue, what happened next took less than 20 seconds. The crew heard surprise shouts, the hum of energy weapons, and then silence when Jake returned. He was carrying extra weapons, and his expression was grim. "They're not dead," he said before anyone could ask. "Unconscious. I use stun settings, but we need to move faster now because someone will find them soon." They continued through the ship's lower levels, and each time they encountered Vakrian soldiers, Jake handled them with brutal efficiency. He moved like water, flowing around attacks and striking with precise force. It was terrifying to watch because he made combat look effortless. Karen grabbed Lisa's arm during a brief pause. "Captain, is it just me, or is he holding back?" Lisa had noticed it too. Jake was fast and skilled, but he wasn't trying to kill anyone. Every shot was a stun. Every strike calculated to incapacitate rather than terminate. He was fighting at maybe half his actual capability because he didn't want more blood on his hands. They reached the docking level and saw the horizon's edge through a viewport. Their ship looked small and fragile next to the massive Vakrian warship, but it represented freedom. "There's a problem," Ben said, pointing to the docking clamps. "Those are mag-locked. We need to release them from the control room, and that room has at least a dozen guards." Jake studied the situation. "I can get you to your ship. The question is whether you can pilot away fast enough once the clamps release." "How fast?" Danny asked. He had been quiet during the escape, focused on not panicking. "You'll have maybe 60 seconds before their weapon systems target you," Jake said. "Can you do it?" "I'll have to," Danny replied. Trying to sound confident, Jake handed weapons to everyone who could shoot. "Here's the plan. I'm going to cause a distraction at the main airlock when the guards respond. You run for your ship. Don't look back. Don't wait for me. Just go." "And what will you be doing?" Lisa demanded. "What I do best," Jake said with a sad smile. "Buying time." Before she could argue, alarms blared throughout the ship. Commander Throke's voice boomed over the intercom in both Vakrian and English. "Attention all personnel. The prisoner designated Reaper has escaped. He is considered extremely dangerous. Use lethal force. I repeat, use lethal force." Jake's expression darkened. "Throck just made this personal. He's not trying to recapture me anymore. He wants me dead." "Then we definitely need to leave now," Karen said urgently. They moved toward the docking bay entrance. But suddenly, the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in a red glow and in that crimson darkness. They heard Throke's voice again. "Reaper, I know you can hear me. Surrender now. And I promise your crew will be allowed to leave unharmed. Continue resisting. And I will order my soldiers to kill everyone." Jake stopped moving. Lisa saw the conflict on his face, the terrible calculation he was making. "Don't you dare," she hissed. "Don't you dare surrender after everything we went through to free you." "He's right, though," Jake said quietly. "I can't protect all of you and fight my way through this ship. Someone's going to die. And it might be one of you." "Then make sure it's not," Ben said firmly. "You held off an army for 72 hours. Surely you can get 5 people to their ship." Jake looked at each of them. These people who had risked everything to save him. Then he made his decision. "Run when I tell you to." he said. "And whatever you hear, whatever you see, just keep running." He stepped out into the open corridor and fired 3 shots into the ceiling. Sparks rained down, and immediately 24 Vakrian soldiers appeared from every direction. They had been waiting in ambush. Jake didn't hesitate. He moved into the enemy with a speed that seemed impossible, using their own numbers against them in close quarters. The Vakrians couldn't fire without risking hitting each other, and Jake exploited that weakness ruthlessly. "Now!" he shouted, and the crew ran. Lisa looked back once and saw Jake fighting like a force of nature. He wasn't trying to kill anymore. He had gone into full combat mode. Vakrian soldiers fell around him, and the one still standing looked genuinely terrified. The crew reached the horizon's edge and rushed aboard. Danny sprinted to the bridge while the others secured the cargo bay through the viewport. They could see Jake still fighting, but he was being pushed back by sheer numbers. "We can't leave him," Perrin said, desperately. "We won't," Lisa promised. She grabbed the ship's intercom. "Danny, can you release the docking clamps remotely?" "Not without the access codes." Danny called back. Lisa pulled out the data chip one last time. "I'm sending you what I have. See if it helps." Seconds crawled by while Danny worked. Outside, Jake had retreated to a defensive position near a bulkhead. Using it for cover, he was outnumbered 20-1 now, and even his skills had limits. Then Commander Throck himself appeared, walking calmly through his own soldiers. "Enough!" he roared. "Reaper, this ends now. I challenge you to single combat. Winner takes all. If you win, your crew goes free. If I win, you surrender." Jake was bleeding from several cuts, breathing hard. He looked toward the horizon's edge, and Lisa knew he was calculating whether they had escaped yet. "Jake, don't." She shouted through the viewport, but he couldn't hear her. Jake lowered his weapon and stepped forward. "I accept your challenge, Commander, but I want your word as a warrior that you'll honor the terms." "You have it," Throck said, and his soldiers backed away. Creating a circle, the 2 warriors faced each other. Throck was larger, stronger, and wearing armor. Jake was wounded, exhausted, and armed with only his combat knife. They circled slowly. Then Throck attacked with savage speed, his claws slashing through the air where Jake's head had been a moment before. Jake rolled, came up inside the Vakrian's guard, and drove his knife into a joint in the armor. Throck roared in pain and backhanded Jake across the corridor. The fight was brutal and short. Both warriors were skilled, but Jake had something Throck didn't: 3 years of pent-up guilt and rage that he finally allowed himself to release. When the dust settled, Throck was on the ground, Jake's knife at his throat. "Yield," Jake said coldly. Throck looked up at the human who had beaten him. "Finish it. You've earned the right." "I don't want that right," Jake replied. "I just want my crew to leave safely." He pulled the knife away and stepped back. "Honor your word, Commander." Throck struggled to his feet, one hand pressed to his wound. He barked orders to his soldiers, and the docking clamps released with a loud clang. Danny's voice crackled over the ship's external speakers. "Jake, get aboard now, we're leaving." But Jake just stood there, watching the horizon's edge. "No, you have to go without me. If I come with you, the Vakrians will hunt you forever." "Like hell," Lisa's voice replied. "You've got 10 seconds to get on this ship before I come out there and drag you aboard myself." Despite everything, Jake smiled. He ran for the ship as Vakrian soldiers raised their weapons. Throck held up his hand, stopping them. "Let him go," the commander said. "I gave my word." Jake reached the airlock just as it began to close. Hands pulled him inside, and the horizon's edge detached from the warship. Danny pushed the engines to maximum, and they jumped to hyperspace before the Vakrians could change their minds in the cargo bay. The crew collapsed in exhaustion and relief. Jake sat against the wall, his head in his hands. Lisa sat down next to him. "You okay?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I broke my promise to myself. I became that person again." "You saved us," Lisa said gently. And you didn't kill anyone, unless you absolutely had to. I was watching. Jake, you held back even when it would have been easier to kill. Doesn't change what I am, he said quietly. Maybe not, she agreed. But it proves you're more than just the Reaper. You're Jake Collins, our engineer, our friend, and someone who cares about doing the right thing. The ship's navigation system beeped. Danny's voice came over the intercom. Captain, I'm picking up a signal. It's from Earth. Command, they're asking us to report to the nearest military station. Jake stood up slowly. They know word must have spread that I'm alive. What do you want to do? Lisa asked. Jake thought for a long moment. I spent 3 years running from who I was. Maybe it's time to stop running. If Earth Command needs the Reaper again, then I'll answer, but on my terms. And what terms are those? Ben asked. I'll fight when innocent people need protecting, Jake said. But I won't be a weapon for politicians or empires. I'll do what I think is right. And if they don't like it, they can try to stop me. Lisa smiled. Sounds like you need a crew. Good thing you already have one. The crew of the Horizon's Edge limped back toward human space, battered but alive. Behind them, Commander Throck filed his report to Vakrian High Command. The Reaper loves. It read, and he's more dangerous than we feared. Not because of his skills, but because he fights with honor in the